All right, let's go ahead and start. Good evening, everyone. This is the last day of the session. We're going to go over the rest of the material. Should be able to get you done here on time. And we're going to have a few questions as part of the quizzes so you can practice what we learned also at the end, okay? All right, so yesterday we spoke about the artifacts, and we spoke about the burn down charts, and we spoke about the velocity chart. Any question on what we worked on yesterday? Any questions from anyone? All right. So I think yesterday I was explaining to everyone how the velocity chart is helping the team forecasting their capacity. And I was giving you the example of a team that might have a lower capacity because there are few people who are, for example, on vacation. Okay. And in that case, you would need to adjust the velocity that you calculated either by summing up the past three sprints capacities, or you would take the last one. But most of the time, people are using the average of the past three sprints in an attempt to accurately forecast the team's velocity for the next sprint or the coming sprint. Okay. Now, if few people are on vacation, and as I was explaining yesterday, you're going to see that your capacity is going to go down, right? And if you are using the last sprint only to forecast the capacity of the next sprint, then you're going to be having your data misleading. Because if you have two people signing member in vacation, and your capacity is falling from 20, for example, 5 points per person for a team of 4 developers, 5 points down times 2, that's going to be 10 points. So if your average capacity is normally 20 and 2 people on vacation, you can have 10 for that sprint. Okay, and when you're done with that, for the next sprint, when you're trying to forecast the capacity of the team, if you are taking only into account the past sprint, then your forecast is going to be screwed up, right? So that's why, on average, people are taking the past 3, so that the skew that the past sprint has on the next one is reduced, right? So if you do an average of the past 3, let's say they had 20, 20, and this sprint they did 10, right? That's what? That's 50, right? Divided by 3 is what? 17-ish. You see, you're closer to the actual 20, right? But if you take in only the last one, which was 10, then you're going to have to forecast the capacity as 10, and that's not correct, especially if everybody's back from vacation. Okay, so that's why it's a good practice to use the average of the past 3 sprints. Questions? All right, so now let's finish up with the how we estimate in Scrum, right? There are a lot of methods that people are using out there, but the main ones, and I'm going to show you the most important one also on those 3, are the BOSS technique. I think I touched up on that before, which stands for big, uncertain, and small. Okay, there's also the t-shirt size estimating technique, and then finally there's the Fibonacci series. Okay, the Fibonacci series is actually the one that is the most used, and I'm going to show you also how it works. So now we also have other terminologies that we're using when it comes to estimating stories. So if you are working and you hear people on the job saying, okay, we need to size a story, we need to point a story, that means that they need to estimate the story. So other terminologies for estimating are sizing and pointing. Okay. All right, so the big, uncertain, and small, how does that work? So in Agile and Scrum in particular, right, we're trying to estimate and put estimate in buckets, right? We don't give exact numbers because, again, an estimate is the best guess that you're making on the complexity of a story relative to another one or relative to other ones. Okay, so it doesn't have to be 100% exact, and it can never be. As long as you're relatively estimating the stories against each other's, then you're good. That's all you need. You don't need to have an absolute estimation as we do in the waterfall SDLC, right? Because in SDLC, waterfall SDLC, for those who worked into the model, we talking about hours and days when we estimate work. Okay, when we estimate features, requirements, and work, we do use days, man hours, and days, right? So it's we say this requirement is going to take us 5 days to develop. It's going to take us 8 hours to develop, right? And that's how you actually do your estimations, right? But here we're not really worrying about having an absolute number. We're having relative numbers or buckets, right? Just to make sure that we estimate the complexity good enough and we can fit stories into specific buckets and we can classify them and know approximately how complex they are relative to the other ones. So the big, uncertain, and the small approach is used as any other techniques to compare stories to each other's and to assign to a group. So it means that you have a story that you think is big relative to other ones. So in this case, you're going to have an elephant. That's a big story. Okay. And you're going to have also a small story, and that's small relative to the big one. Okay. So those are two buckets. So now, how big is big? You guys as a team are going to learn to estimate those and feed them into specific buckets, right? And it's clear usually to see because the difference is kind of huge. There's no medium in the middle, so you have big, small, and uncertain. So small has to be small relative to a big, what the big would be, and you are defining as a team what a big is. And as you work together through the sprints, you know what a big is, how big is a big, and how small is a small. Okay, uncertain is for stories that are not really clear, that we still need to groom. So those are big ones, bigger than big, and for which we don't have a lot of information. So that's uncertain. So we still need to do some research, we still need to do some refinement, and ultimately we need to break those stories down into smaller, either big or small stories. Okay, so those are the three categories of the big, uncertain, and small estimating technique. Okay, question. All right. And then after that, you do have the t-shirt size estimating technique. Okay, and obviously you can see that you're fitting every story into the 5 t-shirt sizes categories, like small, small, medium, large, and extra large. Okay, and again, that's a relative in Scrum. We're doing an estimate in relative to the other stories. Okay, so if a big story to you is big, it has to be big compared to other ones, right? So you're going to classify them as big, and you're going to classify others as medium. You're going to classify some others as small. And with this approach, you have to feed them into those 5 categories. You're going to have the smallest ones, extra small. You're going to have the small ones. You're going to have the medium ones. You're going to have the large ones and the extra large. And most of the time, the large and the extra large stories are also the ones that are uncertain. If you want to map it to what you would have in the big, uncertain, and small technique, estimating technique. So normally the large and the extra small would be among the uncertain. Okay, so we need to research them, refine them, and break them down into small stories. Okay, and extra small and the small story, that's what you want, really, right? If you have a story that is small enough, that means that has been broken to the most simplest form that everyone can understand, can work on, and we can accurately estimate it. Okay, and the medium is just a medium. Okay, questions? And again, remember that those estimates that we're doing, I repeat that multiple times for you to remember it, are relative estimates. Okay, so for example, and when I'm talking about Fibonacci series, I'm going to try to map it again to the whole set of techniques. So I said here that the large and the extra large can be, in comparison to the bus technique, can be mapped under on certain. The medium here could be mapped under the big, and the excess and small could be mapped under the small. Okay, because those are buckets. So anything that will go into those last two, or first two, I should say, should be considered under the bus as small. Anything medium here should be considered as big under the bus, and L and XL should be considered as uncertain, and therefore will need to be broken down. Okay. All right. Now the final one is the Fibonacci series, or the Fibonacci sequence. So Fibonacci sequence is a sequence of number that is built by adding the previous two numbers up to find the next one, right? So in this example, you can clearly see that you have 1, and then 1 and 2, you have 3, and to get the next one, you're adding up 2 and 3, that gives you 5. To get the next sequence of the numbers, you're adding up 5 and 3, that give you 8, and then 8 and 5 gives you 13, and then 13 and 8, it gives you 21, and then 21 and 13, it gives you 34, and then 34 and 21, it gives you 55, etc., etc., etc. Okay, so that's the series. That's the Fibonacci series. Okay, and that's what we usually commonly use widely in the industry. And again, each story is compared to the other ones, right? And then we see relative to the other ones where they fit. So in those cases, you would have stories maybe that are between 2 and 3, right? I mean, between 3 and 5. But given that the series doesn't have 4, you need to decide in what bucket you need to fit that. Is it into the 3 buckets or into the 5 buckets? Okay, the same thing happens for stories, because when you're going to be doing estimating, at some point you're going to be facing the challenge of, okay, I think it's more of a 5 than an 8, and now you need to decide in which bucket you want to fit it. If it's closer to an 8, then you put it in the 8 bucket. If it's closer to a 5, then you put it in the 5 bucket, because there's nothing in between the numbers. Okay, so that allows you to be able to radically separate all those stories and feed them into specific buckets as part of the estimate. And again, that's the best guess that you're making on the complexity of the story relative to the other ones. Okay, some people have a lot of challenges with this on the daily job. I've seen to people, they're trying to rationalize this practice too much, because they want to have absolute numbers, because that's what they're used to, right? When you're saying estimating, how much it's going to cost you to build this application, people look for numbers. Okay, it's going to take you $200,000, for example. Okay, they don't want, it's going to cost you between $200,000 and $300,000. They don't want that. They want an absolute number. But what this technique does is it helps you, or it forces you to make sure you separate all the items into those buckets, and the ones for which the numbers are too big, then it tells you that they need to be refined, added, and broken down into smaller stories, so that those are manageable in sprints. The other thing is, the smaller you have those stories, the better it is to work in sprints, right? Because now, since it's broken down, your capacity is not really in float anymore. Because I told you the capacity of the team can be 80, for example, but because the numbers that you're taking on the Fibonacci sequence, adding all those stories up, it doesn't give you exactly your capacity, right? So you might get easily out of your capacity because a story is too big, and the previous number in this sequence maybe is 5 points away from the next one. So for example, 8 and 13, right? The difference is 5. There's a big gap between the two of them. But if you have stories that are maybe 3 to 5, it's easily manageable. And if you are, maybe your capacity is already, let's say, as you're adding items in your sprint backlog, you're going to be maybe at, let's say, 75. Right now, if the next high priority story in your backlog is 13, right, it's difficult to do anything on that until you have a 13 point capacity availability to be able to take that up. Does that make sense? So let me explain that differently. So if you have in your product backlog only stories that are maybe 3 at 5, right? Those are small stories. Those are manageable. You can easily add them up and feed them to get to a round number that is close to your capacity, compared to having a big number like a 13, and you may be getting already, as you're adding those 5, 3, 5, 3, you have 113 story left over, and maybe you're already 75, right? You picked up, let's say, how many would that be? 25 stories of 5. Okay, we said we're prioritizing our backlog, product backlog. On the top, we have the highest priorities, and those ones are estimated already. But if you happen to have made the mistake where you didn't break down everything to those small manageable story points, then let's say by mistake you have a 13, you didn't have time to break that down into multiple stories, so you have a 13 now, and you get into your product backlog, you have your 25 stories that are I said 25, sorry, 15 times 5 is 75. You have your 15 stories that are 5, right? And then your capacity is 80. Now the next highest priority story is a 13. So you're going to be seeing that now you're going to face a dilemma. You have a 75 and you just need a 5 story that you can pick up. But since you don't have any highest priority 5 stories, but the one that you have is 13, if you take that, you're actually going to be over capacity, so you cannot take it. So that basically means that you're going to be running under capacity because you didn't break down that story small enough so you can fit it under your capacity. Does that make sense? And you're losing because now you're forced to work on the 75 stories instead of being very close to 80. If you had, for example, another 3 point story or another 5 point story. So that means the smaller your stories are, the better it is, even for taking up the work under the Fibonacci sequence estimation techniques. Does that make sense? Questions? No questions? All right. All right, let's keep it moving. Now let's talk about the estimation flow and the planning poker. So how it actually happens, right? And in general, and many companies are using the planning poker to do the estimate during their sprint planning or refinement. Okay, and this is really what it looks like. How many people heard of the planning poker before, especially people who were already certified? Nobody? Okay. So the planning poker is a tool, it's like a game that is really used to make estimating really fun. And for that, we use most of the time the Fibonacci sequence estimating technique. Okay, so the way it works is you do have a series of numbers, right, that follow the Fibonacci sequence. Okay, normally we don't really use a 0, but for illustration purpose, I just had this from that the image I used. So it's 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, the way we counted it. And then whenever you you having people in the meeting when you're doing the refinement. You work through the stories, you ask questions, you add details. Everybody's getting comfortable to understand what the story is about, what needs to be developed, what work needs to be done, all the tasks that are under that specific story. And at some point, when you're all comfortable with it, you need to do estimation, right? And you're getting together now and you're pulling the planning poker, which is a tool that lets you guess your number without having any people knowing. So that means that you just providing your number, and everybody is going to be showing his number at the same time, right? So that not the people on the team are not going to get influenced by other people, right? Because you need to understand the story and make sure that you give your best guess of the complexity of the story by providing your points, and it doesn't have to come from somebody else. And we give the opportunity of to everyone in the team to provide he or her or his feedback, and then you're gonna have everybody on the team that's going to be showing his result at the same time. So when that happens, okay, usually there's a like this guy that you're seeing here. Usually it is the Scrum Master, right? Who's going to be doing that? Who's going to be facilitating that? Because I told you one of the roles of the Scrum Master is to facilitate stuff. So this guy is the Scrum Master, okay? So he's going to be opening the story, and then we're going to be entering the story number that we're trying to estimate using the planning poker into subtasks, and then everybody's going to be seeing that on the screen. Now we're going to be sending a link to everyone, and everyone is going to be seeing, is going to have the opportunity of providing his estimate or her estimate personally without seeing what the other people are doing. But it's a link, the same link for everyone. And when you click on that, it just asks you to enter your number, right? How many points do you think this story is? And you don't have access to see what other people are doing, right? Now, when everyone is done entering, you can see that on the screen that everyone is done, but you cannot see yet what they provided as number of points. And when they are done, the Scrum Master is going to click on reveal. There's a button that's going to reveal it. And it's going to be like everyone is showing his card with the number at the same time. Okay, that's basically how it works. So all those people are going to be, the four folks on the dev team are going to be picking up a number among this sequence as a personal estimate of the complexity of the story without having to see anybody else's estimate. And when everyone is done, that's when we're going to be revealing what everyone else's has at the same time, right? And then we're going to be discussing about it. So that's basically what happens, right? So once the Scrum Master is revealing that, now you can see what everyone says or everyone provided. Some people are going to say it's an 8. Some people would say it's a 5. Some people would say it's a 8, 5, 8, 5, 3, 13, whatever, right? And the more the newer the team is, or the newer team members you have as part of the dev team, usually the more discrepancies you see. But as the team matures, if they work a long time and they know the application, they're on the same page onto they're on their knowledge level, they're going to be consistently providing around the same number. So the variation is not going to be too big. Okay. So then what happens if you do have everyone with a different number, for example? How do you do that? So now you provide the opportunity to everyone to explain why they think the estimate is the number that they provided. Okay, so that's where we start discussing. Okay, I think it's the 8 because we have to do this task before. We need to get data. It's going to take time to develop this and design and test that etc. Everyone is going to give a justification. And then once everyone has been listening to the other folks, they have the chance to replay it. So the Scrum Master can go ahead, okay, based on all the information that now we have and the arguments and the justifications that people provided, let's go ahead and replay it. And we're going to replay it another time. So another link, everyone is going to click on it and then provide what he or she thinks is now the right number. They replay it, and then the Scrum Master is going to reveal it once again. And the next time when you do that, you're going to see that people tend to have closer numbers. Okay. And it's really never exact. Everyone is almost never giving an exact number. And if we replay the second time, most of the team that I work with, and the way the companies are doing it is that the second time, if the estimate of everyone is not relatively close, then we take the majority. So what is the number that is actually closer? If there's a tight, we're forced to replay it. So in this case, for example, you have 5 people. That's easy, right? It's easy because it's hard to have a tie. You're gonna have 8, 8, 8. So in this case, if that's the second time that they're replaying it, then they're probably gonna have to go with an 8. So the estimate of the story would have to be an 8. Okay, so that's really how the estimating process works on the planning poker. Questions? Okay, let's move on to the scalability of Scrum. So a lot of companies have been using Scrum all over their departments or their services, and a lot of people a lot of teams usually have a lot of dependencies from each other's, right? Especially when you're working on a 500 plus or more than 100 people's project. Okay, so that's where the scalability of Scrum comes in handy, because let's say you're developing an application that is going to be impacting or helping different departments, and each department has maybe 5 Scrum teams of 7 folks. Okay, so it means that all those teams somehow have dependencies on each other, whether it is by data, whether it is by transactions, whether it is by technology, whether it is by feature and stuff like that. For example, there can be some configurations where a department in a company is the one that handles the infrastructure, the database, the cloud, and everything, right? That stores and manipulates data. You can be having a department that handles maybe, okay, let's speak about payment processing organization, for example, that processes credit cards payments, right? You can have a department that processes credit card transactions. You can have a department that processes debit card transactions, and you can have a department that handles the infrastructure. So the database stores all those transactions. You can have a department that does the settlement, to reconcile all the transactions and pays the merchant and stuff like that. So if you have a project that is touching all of those departments, then it means that they need somehow to be able to work together. But in Scrum, like I said before, you cannot have a team that is more than 9 developers, right? So it means that you're going to have multiple teams, not only from the different departments, but you're going to have them working together somehow. So that's how we're scaling Scrum. How do we have different departments, doing their things and being able to work together toward accomplishing or building a product that is going to be impacting all of those departments, or for which we need inputs from all those departments. Okay, so it comes from the team of teams. So what we're going to be doing, we're going to be forming teams of teams. Okay, you're going to have one representative of all of those Scrum teams attending Scrum of Scrums. Those are the kind of the stand-up meetings for the Scrum of Scrums. Okay, so you're going to have, let's say, 4 Scrum teams from the credit card department, 2 Scrum teams from the debit card department, 2 Scrum teams from the infrastructure department, 1 Scrum team from the settlement department. Okay, that's 9. So you have 9 teams now, and somehow they need to be able to adjust and agree on their dependencies. So at that moment, what happens is, from all those 9 teams, you're going to have one representative, right, that is sent, okay, to attend meetings that we call the Scrum of Scrums. And that representative is going to be the one who's actually safeguarding the interest of its team and helping also other teams to get what they need from the other ones. Okay, so let's say the infrastructure department needs some data to test persisting stuff in their databases, right? They need the data from the credit card, right? Transactional data from the credit card department and debit card department. It means that they need to be sequencing their work so that when everyone is testing, then they have enough time to get the data persisted into the database. Okay, and that is really coordinated during the Scrum of Scrum meeting. So the Scrum of Scrum meeting is usually a meeting that happens once a week, and you have one representative of each of those Scrum teams that are part of the project, even though they are from different departments, that attend, and they answer most of the time those three questions. What has your team accomplished since the last meeting? Okay, and again, it doesn't have to be once a week. It just depends on, you know, what they agree on. Do they want to have that once a week? Do they want to have that twice a week? Do they want to have that once every 2 weeks? Right? They agree on that. And however the frequency is, when they meet, they answer those questions for the most part. What has your team accomplished since our last meeting? So that's where the representative of each Scrum team that is part of the meeting is going to say, we did this, we completed that, we worked on this, we built this feature, etc., etc. What problems occurred, if any, that negatively affected your team? Okay, we faced an issue with technology. We had some problems with the new network that was installed, and we didn't have these tools. We had to be slowed down a little bit. What does your team wants to accomplish before we meet again? Okay, what are you planning on doing? So this sounds similar to your daily stand-up meeting, right? Where we saying every team member, every member from the dev team is saying, what did I accomplish yesterday? What am I going to accomplish today? And what are the impediments that I have? Okay, sounds similar. And when all those teams are talking about that, it allows them to anticipate any issue and clear any dependency up front. That's why some in those Scrum of Scrum meetings, usually what they do, they get feedback and they plan their work, relative to what the others are doing. So they're trying to align the way they develop their product backlogs so that it doesn't negatively impact the other teams in terms of dependency. So if, for example, they see that by picking up their stories to work on this sprint, some other teams are going to need some data from them. Then they need to be able to plan to work on that before, so that when those people from the other teams need the data, is readily available. Okay, so that's really what the Scrum of Scrum model looks like. So now you have the Scrum of Scrum, you have SAFe. Those are all models that are under the scalability of Scrum, that are playing around the scalability of Scrum, and it's really useful in big organizations. Okay, so due to the limit of number of folks that you can have in the Scrum team, then you can break those down into different teams that work together around the Scrum of Scrum. Okay, does that make sense? Any question? Okay. All right, so this is really what it looks like. I'm just gonna give you a breakdown. We're gonna come back, finish this up, and take a few quizzes, and we should be done. Okay, so let's break now, and we're gonna have to join in 10 minutes. So at 7:19 Eastern time. Okay. All right.